Welcome. My name is Eugene Sepulveda, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Culturati. In case you're not familiar with us, Culturati is a community of leaders who get the power of culture to contribute to our success, whether it's in the workplace, as employees, as communities. We put together thought leadership, we curate lots of publications and send it out on our bi-weekly newsletter called On Culture. If you'd like to know more, please go to our website, culturatiSummit.com, and you can register for an email that'll allow us to send you the newsletter. It is a great pleasure that I get to introduce my good friend Rajkumari Neogy. She is the creator of I Belong, the Disruptive Diversity Bootcamp, and is the author of WIT Factor, Shifting the Workplace Paradigm by Becoming Your Optimal Self. She's long been fascinated with team culture, especially in the tech arena, and believes that every individual brings a superpower that often isn't fully unlocked. She provides expertise on team culture cohesion, disruptive diversity and inclusion, and organizational epigenetics. Over the last 20 years, Rajkumari has worked with organizations worldwide, including Slack, HelloSign, Salesforce, Gainsight, Twilio, Ever AI, TrueMaker, Walt Disney Animation Studios, Hipscop Drive, Wells Fargo, Shuttle, Cisco, Facebook, Amazon, and a lot of others. I'm going to stop there. In 2013, she founded iRestart. She has now got I Belong to address issues of team dysfunction, imposter syndrome, and feelings of exclusion. We're really proud that Raj has agreed, and very appreciative that Rajkumari has agreed to be a scholar for Culturati, and that she regularly presents at our summit. Rajkumari, can't thank you enough for spending today with us and bringing forward such an important topic.
Oh, Eugene, such a pleasure, such an honor. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So, Overwhelm. This has been a topic that has been near and dear to my heart for quite some time. And when Eugene asked, what would you like to present? I said, for sure, Overwhelm. I think that we are in unprecedented times as a collective. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to take a moment, take a beat, and step back and do some self-reflection today and really kind of dive deep into who we are as leaders, as individuals, and as humans. And I want to start this presentation by asking a question. I thought this question was so powerful. What do you do in times of despair? Archbishop Desmond Tutu was actually asked this question many moons ago. And his answer really tugged at my heartstrings. In times of despair, you show your humanity. I think that so many of us, so many different communities around the globe are exactly here. And the question is, how do we get to our humanity? I think that's really what I'm asking. But we're going to do this from a lens of overwhelm. This is a presentation that is just broad strokes. This is just touching the surface. This is really just an opportunity for me to ask a bunch of questions and for you to maybe hold those questions in your heart, top of mind, and see where you land with this. So let's start by defining overwhelm. I think that's a really, really easy place to start. And truly the definition of overwhelm is being inundated. I think so many of us are inundated. I certainly am. As I step back into the new year, I've been on sabbatical for almost 3 months, and reconnecting with my clients across the globe. It's been heartbreaking to hear the exhaustion, the depletion, and the concerns across the globe and across organizations. And so that brings me to the next question, which is, where are you on this spectrum? Do you actually experience overwhelm? Would you say that you are overwhelmed? Or might you be on the other side of the spectrum, where many people that I've been talking to also are, which is, not quite sure what is overwhelm? I actually feel too much. I feel numb. I feel that feeling is not something I can afford right now. So a place to begin to kind of maybe get underneath the hood a little bit of overwhelm is to start with stress. And maybe we can even start with my computer working. I don't know what just happened here. Okay, there we go. Perfect timing with stress. So stress is really about a shift or a change in the moment that causes physical, emotional, mental, and psychological strain. You think about even, laughing in a room that everyone's quiet, like the library, right? That might be stressful. Or winning the lottery actually might even be stressful. So when we think about stress and we think about the different types of stress that we experience, there's actually something called eustress, which I'm sure many of you as leaders know exactly what that's about. And there's something called distress. Now, eustress is something that impacts us positively, and distress is something that impacts us negatively. You can think of it like this. You can think of it as eustress as something that energizes us, motivates us. Maybe it's something that you're doing that is about competitive sports, for example, or even in a yoga stretch that you're just kind of pushing yourself and it's a little bit strenuous, but it feels good in accomplishing it or getting through it. Whereas the distress actually generates anxiety. It generates a sense of concern or pain or angst. And eventually distress could take us down the road of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a form of trauma, really. So when we think about overwhelm, this is really kind of rooted in the experience of anxiety. And I think right now, Eugene and I were talking right before we went live here, that there's an epidemic of anxiety and that so many individuals are really wrestling with how to reconcile this anxiety, how to show up in dealing with this. So let's talk a little bit about the symptoms of overwhelm. So many people that I'm talking to have this ongoing stress. I know I certainly do. And it comes with a continuous experience of exhaustion, right? It might even lead us to the edge of depression. There's been talk of some mental health situations that are occurring, even concerns about whether people are having the desire to continue in this mode. It's been really heartbreaking to have these conversations. Some of the physical attributes look like palpitations, headaches, high blood pressure, and digestion issues. And if you understand the science of stress, you can see that this physiological experience, these physiological symptoms are in fact stress related. Maybe you hear people in meetings or even yourself whispering or silently sharing, I can't do this anymore. It's too much. I just can't keep going. I'm too tired. There is a distinct difference between burnout and overwhelm. All of this is also in experiences of burnout. But the distinct factor, this distinct difference with burnout is that there's a negativism or a cynicism that's directly correlated to one's position or one's job. So there's a not wanting to be in one's role, not wanting to be in one's job, not wanting to continue. So it's directly correlated to the job. Whereas overwhelm is just ubiquitous, it's everywhere. This is Sarah Payton. She's a dear friend of mine. She's the author of the book, Your Resonant Self. And I love what she says here. Overwhelm is a natural response to the present day modern life that our brains are not actually designed for. We are not designed to receive a constant and steady stream of stress. Our brains are not designed for this. We need respite, we need rest, we need time to reflect and check out and allow ourselves to decompress. And when we don't give ourselves time to do that, what may start to happen is that our brains stop working. Or at the very least, they work much slower. And, before I went on sabbatical, I was there. I was wondering why my brain wasn't working at the level that it was earlier in the year. And as it starts to work slower, And we maybe find ourselves trying to turn up the volume a little bit by drinking coffee or, doing ways to kind of increase our energy levels. Feeling overwhelmed can happen anywhere in your life, and probably in the intersections of your life. It can happen in your personal life, in your relationships with your family, your loved ones, your coworkers, in community, and especially in society. This is Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky. She's written quite a few books, and she talks on the topics of overwhelm and secondhand trauma. And I love what she says here. The conditions of overwhelm exist for everyone. Every one of us, whether we're born into these conditions, whether we walk consciously into them, or whether we descend, or whether they descend upon us. And when she talks about descending upon us, she's really referring to the systems of oppression. And I think so many communities face on a daily basis layers of systemic oppression. And so having to contend with that is exhausting, it's depleting, it results in physiological responses. And when we don't actually tend to our overwhelm, when we don't address it, what starts to happen is that there's a saturation piece. There's a way in which we start to show up that most likely isn't our optimal best self. And we start to experience compromised states, as Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky states. We might find ourselves distracted. We're on social media way too much. I mean, I had to put some limitations and rules into my day and cut my, my social media and my news reading down to 20 minutes because it was just getting out of control. When we do this, we might find ourselves disconnected. We might be longing for meaningful social connection. We might be longing for ourselves in that connection as we find ourselves distracted. You might remember that in one of the symptoms, this inability to be with ourselves is present. There's a sense of wanting to attach to things or finding value in maybe even addiction of some sort, whether it's shopping or video gaming. And then there's an overall depletion. There's this exhaustion where our coffers are running on fumes. And so when we come to these compromised states where our brain is really struggling to show up, where we're physically exhausted, the biggest piece here is our inability to be with ourselves. And this just gets exponentially highlighted. Now we're looking to actually seek those compromised states of distraction and attachment. And when we find ourselves here, the convergence of all of these factors leads us to loneliness. That is what is the foundation of overwhelm, is this disconnected state of being. The research around loneliness is just truckloads full. I mean, it's unbelievable and it's heartbreaking. We know so much about neglect. We know so much about the impact of solitary confinement. We understand so much about how the brain is rewired when we don't have meaningful connection. And so as I was reading all of this research that was there, I was reading what Sarah Payton had and what Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky had. What kind of came forward is that all of these converging factors slotted really nicely into 3 different buckets. And I want to share each of these buckets with you and give you some tools or some thoughts that you could use both for yourself as well as for your team or the organization at large as a leader. So the 3 buckets, or the 3 pillars, if you will, are: the first one is being unsupported, having the experience of being all on our own. And this can be a quite heartbreaking and disappointing experience. The other one is unresolved issues, and we'll dive deep into that. And then the third is personal hardship. This Zoom poll just popped up, so just give me a moment while I readjust it and move it over to the side. Eugene, I'm just going to ask for your support. You cannot see the poll window when I put it up on the screen, is that right? It's not blocking the slide.
It is right now, Raj. I just think what we can note.
Wait, I'll let you drive the poll then when we're ready.
Yeah, I think we take it back off, but just to note that, 80-90% of the people are concerned and very concerned about well-being in the workplace.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful to know. So let's dive into these buckets so that we can start to examine how we can address this. When we think about, I just want to go back to the loneliness piece. When we think about defining distress, and remember, distress is where we are impacted negatively, and where experiences in our immediate environment cause us to have anxiety or maybe even depression. Some of the leading experts in trauma define trauma as being too alone. This is Sarah Payton's definition. Gabor Mate, who's the author of The Myth of Normal, talks about that the essence of loss of self is trauma. And I think this is really important to understand, because parts of this presentation offer the symptoms which really highlight this inability to be alone. And I think this is really an interesting piece. So let's get into each of these buckets here. So all on our own, or being supported. When we experience loneliness in whatever capacity, it starts to change the neurochemistry of our brain. And this is really important to understand. In fact, certain peptides can get activated in loneliness that actually result in aggression. And we've seen an uptick in aggression in flights. So I was wondering if that was correlated with the pandemic in the last few years. And when this happens, this loneliness that shifts the neurochemistry of the brain, it turns off dopamine. I know that when I was going through the pandemic myself, I needed a greater dopamine hit. So my social media scrolling, skyrocketed. My video gaming skyrocketed. I'm not a video gamer at all. And I started playing video games on my phone. And what we're seeking, what we're just in so much hunger for, is connection, right? We know that the neurochemistry is so different when we have connection. So if you might find yourself here, the opportunity or the invitation is to seek comfort, to seek support, to find a peer or colleague to partner with on a project or a deadline that you're working with. And if you're a leader, really check in with them, really take the time to slow down and ask them where they might need some support. Ask them where you can show up. And even if you can't meet their needs, that's okay. Just being able to have that conversation and then providing the clarity about why you can't meet the needs, that's connection, right? That's what we want to create here. And so when we have that sense of connection, now what we're doing is we're reducing the cortisol, we're reducing the stress, we're reducing the adrenaline, and we're starting to come from the right hemisphere a little bit more, that empathic, connected state, where we can now secrete different types of neurochemistry, neurochemicals like oxytocin and endogenous opioids. So the second one was unresolved issues. Now, I just finished an article that Eugene published in the Culturati newsletter, and there's a really great link in the article to learned helplessness. If you don't know what learned helplessness is, I highly entreat you to do a deeper dive. I think this is also become endemic in the ways in which we show up, and we have just kind of I know when I was at Facebook, so much of how we were onboarded was figure it out on your own. Like here's the wiki pages, go figure it out. And so there's the stress that comes with that. But when we have this experience of learned helplessness, and the research here is heartbreaking, people don't have the motivation, don't have the engagement. I just recently went back to some data around McKinsey and Gallup to see where we were in the US around workforce engagement. We're back to 68 according to Gallup and 67.7% with McKinsey. We still are working with disengaged, workforces that are really challenged. So how do we start to support them differently? And I think looking at learned helplessness is really an interesting opportunity, because this is directly linked to anxiety and depression and phobias that we may not even be aware of. We may just think that this is the way things are. But if we have an opportunity to look a little deeper, it might, bear some fruit, bear some results. So what can you do here? If you think that you yourself might need some support around learned helplessness, and to be honest, I was working with my coach just a few weeks ago, and we uncovered a limiting belief of mine that was rooted in learned helplessness, and I was shocked because I knew that I was doing this presentation. So, yeah, that was a little bit of a humbling moment for sure. Seek support from someone who's licensed or experienced. Find a therapist or a coach or even a support group that really understands and can navigate mental health issues with you. And if you're a leader, take the time to really understand the resources in your organization and share them out to the group, share them out to your team, encourage them to take time off. Our nervous systems are really depleted right now globally, and people are tired and still trying to push through. And with all that's happening, especially in the US around the layoffs, and that more layoffs are coming, times of despair, right? And then from a neurochemical perspective, when we have that sense of safety, what we're actually doing is creating a neurochemical response. So being able to show up more inclusively, being able to show up with the intention of creating psychologically safe spaces is more important than ever right now. And then the last one, personal hardship. This one's really rooted in trauma. I run these courses called, these boot camps called Biology of Belonging Boot Camp, where we really look at individual trauma and transgenerational trauma. And I also run a course called Understanding Humans at Work, where we really look at the leadership lens through the neurochemistry of the left and right hemisphere. This is an invitation for you to look at how you're showing up and reflect on the triggers and reactions that you might be experiencing with your team, with yourself, with your loved ones, under duress, under stress, and really look at ways in which that stress is preventing you from showing up inclusively, preventing you from really creating those spaces of psychological safety. So one of the things that I advocate for constantly with organizations, with senior leaders, is how about offering some courses that are trauma informed through that lens to really get employees to self-reflect, to find a safe space to land, and to kind of, reconnect with themselves. And we are so hungry for ourselves. We're so hungry for connection. So that's one option. And then as a leader, maybe take a moment to understand the neuroscience of leadership, and specifically around the nervous system. The helplessness state always comes from a shut down state in the nervous system. So you may have heard of the fight, flight, and freeze response. So that learned helplessness gets the freeze state activated. So just starting to understand a little bit more about how nervous systems work and how to really connect and engage with them, especially in moments of exhaustion and stress. And then, of course, when we have a sense of being seen and heard in the world, this secretes serotonin. So we're all walking pharmacies, right? We all have this huge, vast access to all the neurochemistry. How do we begin to work with that as leaders, especially, so that we can reconnect with our workforce and have them reconnect to each other? So I'm going to give you the antidote. I'm going to give you the antidote to overwhelm. After all of that doom and gloom, here's the antidote. And I'm going to give it to you in the next slide. It is this: tactical empathy. Now, if you haven't heard of tactical empathy, this is a term that was coined by Chris Voss. He is the author of Never Split the Difference. This is his book right here. And he has a course on masterclass on tactical empathy. So you're welcome to explore that. Tactical empathy really is rooted in a lot of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence. And there are really three components to tactical empathy, as you will learn if you decide to either read his book or do his course. And Daniel Goleman talks about this. There's something called cognitive empathy, which is noticing what's happening in the moment. Then there's something called affective empathy, which is being able to name what you just noticed in the moment. And then there's compassionate empathy, which is moving into action. So you'll notice that the action piece is at the very, very end of tactical empathy. And this is key because the research is starting to show really beautifully now that how we actually calm the nervous system down, how we build connection with such facility, with such ease, is through resonance and understanding. And this is starting to show up far more commonly in different parts of conversation. And I'm really excited about that. So tactical empathy, this is Chris's definition of tactical empathy, where it requires you to demonstrate to your counterpart how deeply you care, how deeply you're listening, and how you are considering their position. And this is so important. And so when we think about Daniel Goleman's words about notice, name, and manage, that is also being used with Chris Voss's work. By the way, Chris Voss, I didn't even tell you who he was. He is a former FBI hostage negotiator, so he may have a little experience working with individuals. And so this noticing, this naming, and this managing is so much about self-regulation. Can we start to notice this for ourselves? Remember, one of the main symptoms is the inability to connect with ourselves, right? And this is the direct route to that reconnection, to being able to sit with, to learn who we are and what is happening in the moment. And many of us might need support doing it. That doing it alone might be very scary or even terrifying, and that's okay. The research shows that when we are able to name what is missing in our experience, this is a direct quote from Sarah Payton, when we're able to name what's missing in our world, this actually happens to activate the right prefrontal cortex right here, sends the signal to the amygdala, and works with the vagus nerve that connects to our heart, our lungs, the rest of our body, and slows us down. It gives us an opportunity to even breathe, right? And when we're able to do that for ourselves, goodness me, now we're able to do this with others, with our team, with our loved ones, with our families. We can now start to bridge that gap through connection. We can communicate through resonance, and we can have that engagement, that performance that we all want. This is a quote from Laura Vanderlipsky. If negative emotions narrow thought action repertoires, well, guess what? The positive emotions broaden them. And I'll just leave you with this as we close out this presentation. Overwhelm is a very complicated and ubiquitous symptom found in all organizations right now, especially on the heels of the years of the pandemic and the incredible violence that we've experienced globally, and so much turmoil and turbulence. As leaders, it is my very humble opinion that it is our absolute duty to address this and ultimately heal it by creating cultures that prioritize community, which is about oxytocin, and connection, which is about oxytocin and endogenous opioids, and care, which takes us into that relational piece. Earlier last year, this young man made me cry while we were on stage, and I loved what he said. As leaders, how do we develop whole humans? This is such an important question that Chris is asking. And I always like to follow up this question with my question. And as humans, how are we developing ourselves? Thank you very much.
Raj, excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to bring up the second polling question. Our organization regularly monitors employee well-being. If you'd answer that. And then please add your questions to the chat. But Raj, I've got a couple to start out with. What are the implications of overwhelm to employers?
Lost money, lost revenue. I mean, this is just like, I talk about this all the time, exclusion. I once had a CEO ask me, I flew down to LA to do a full day of training with the C-suite, and I hadn't yet met the CEO. And the very first question after us doing our niceties out of the CEO's mouth was, what's the point of me being nice to my employees? And my response was, every single time that you are mean to them, interrupt them, or shut them down some way, you are shutting down the parts of their brain that's making you money. The McKinsey report that just came out, I think last fall, was it? Talked about workplace toxicity. I mean,
Right.
overwhelm is the outgrowth of toxicity, right? I mean, we are experiencing overwhelm because we're having to contend with so much toxicity. And that toxicity wants us to create a distance from it, which then brings us back to loneliness, which then brings up the physiological elements. So as organizations, it is time for us to move toward a direction where we are holding both the get stuff done mentality and create community mentality and balance that.
Well, I know, you and I, for many years talked about a lot of this, and this is a choir. The people that are, on Culturati Live are not the ones usually who are, although we all slip, who probably have great practices to bring out the whole human. But in the context of unintentionality, of being unintentionally kind of locking out some of the whole human, I think in a conversation you and I had about productivity, all over the country, all over the world, particularly with our partners, McKinsey and Microsoft, and then Indeed and Glassdoor, we're having conversations about, is there a new definition of productivity, particularly in the hybrid world? And you gave me great insight a few months ago, which I've quoted and attributed many, many times.
What was it?
Well, we've got to include safety and rest within a new definition of productivity, because without it, we're not going to get resonance. And without resonance, we're not going to get empathy. And as I say this, and as I went back to those notes, I thought, holy heck, is that what's happening in the country? I mean, we seem to have such little empathy. Is it because we're all stressed out and have no rest and resonance that it's a vicious cycle?
100%. If my overwhelm is generating cortisol and adrenaline, where's the space for empathy? Where's the space for relationality? Where's the space for connection? I don't have it. I want to go to bed. I want to drink a glass of wine. I want to watch Netflix. I don't have time for connection. I don't have any energy for that.
And so not only is it slowing us down, I think, would it be doing the opposite of what we want out of productivity? It would also, I think about what this must do to our ability to be innovative and creative.
Sure. Well, 100%. So there's a really interesting book called Affective Neuroscience by Jaak Panksepp, and a lot of what my Understanding Humans course is based on his work, actually, the circuits of emotion and motivation. And he talks about how the left hemisphere is wired for motivation, how the right hemisphere is wired for relationality. And what is so interesting is in the right hemisphere, where he talks about the different circuits, there's a care circuit that we're wired for that secretes endogenous opioids and oxytocin, but there's also a play circuit that we're wired for, and it secretes endocannabinoids. And what's so interesting is this play circuit is the first circuit to shut down in moments of stress.
Wow.
And that's the circuit where we do creativity, innovation. So here we are asking our workforce to create, to innovate, to put forth, to get stuff done.
Right.
And the demands that we're putting on top of that is actually shutting down that play circuit.
Right.
So you have this kind of domino effect of first goes the play circuit, then goes, and once that play circuit goes, now each of the circuits also go to a fight, flight, and freeze stance. So how you can know if the play circuit is starting to shut down is people start speaking sarcastically. So that's a triggered fight, flight response. And if that sarcasm becomes a default way of engaging, then what starts to happen is now that's creating a distance in connection, and that care circuit is being impacted, so that we're not having as much empathy. Now, if you really have social capital with the person and you're being sarcastic with them, that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. But when I've run Understanding Humans quite a few times, many leaders will come forward and say, wow, I didn't realize I was speaking sarcastically to my team all the time. And now I realize that why I'm doing that is for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Right.
So that's one insight. The next thing to go is the care circuit. The care circuit is our empathy circuit. Now we've lost innovation and creativity, we've lost brainstorming, and now we've lost relationality, and we're building relationships and bridges. What's left? Well, fear, rage, disgust, and then getting stuff done. And then we become this very transactional workforce that is depleted, trying to execute.
You know, as we've talked about a few times, and for people on this live session to understand, we've talked about the epidemic of anxiety that both Rajkumari and I have been seeing among colleagues, among friends and friends, and whether it is female leaders and male leaders, it appears to me that so many people kept it together through the pandemic, took care of their employees, their companies, their families, and just made it happen. And here, you know, mid last year to now are depleted and have had different levels of anxiety, up into including, you know, acute debilitating anxiety. Wow. And going to see a professional, and possibly some of the treatments include, you know, chemistry, prescriptions. It's something that should be explored. But jump into, so what do we as employers do? What do we as employers need to do? I know deploy tactical empathy, you know, which is, you know, making sure that people feel listened to, that they can make a difference, that we are, how did you say it, that we are listening to and being thoughtful about considering their position. What else do we need to do?
I'm smiling because I only think that there's only one thing. If you, as a leader, don't feel comfortable doing that, why not? Whatever the trigger is around empathy, whatever the trigger is around deep listening, whatever the trigger is in stepping into resonance, whatever the trigger is for you, that's the invitation for you to delve into those limiting beliefs. As we start to uncover our own leadership styles that surface discomfort, that surface avoidant behavior, that surface ways of showing up in a way that's dismissive or wanting to shut down a conversation or not give someone feedback because it's too difficult. Those are all invitations to explore for yourself, all of them. So it's about showing up for others, but it's about also witnessing. This is the core of emotional intelligence that Daniel Goleman talks about, right? Self-awareness and being able to really understand who we are as leaders so that we can show up as effective as possible for our team. And really finding a coach, finding someone who can support you to understand those triggers, to understand those behaviors so that you can start to have a different experience. It's so key for me. And that's what I do with leaders all day long.
Let's bring in some of the audience questions. How do we get past the fear of admitting overwhelm being detrimental to our career trajectory?
That's a great question. What's the fear that's preventing it? You know, what is it about the fear that is holding you back from even mentioning it? Is it that there's a fear of being let go, fired, laid off? Is it a fear of being vulnerable? Is it a fear of what is that fear?
And so I'll add to that, Raj, which is some of the executives that I've known, and some of them are CEOs. They're fearful that their board will think that they're no longer the optimal operating chief executive. They may have a vulnerability. There's many below the CEO that fear that they won't be selected for the next biggest project because they've got a weakness at this point. I will say that in talking to board members and in talking to CEOs, I'm trying to think, did someone tell me this, or is this my aggregate feeling that someone being so self-aware of their position is a strength, and someone being able to acknowledge what they need and what's holding them back. And I think the CEOs that I admire all recognize that we're in an environment of mental health crisis.
100%.
And we're all taking care of each other.
100%. And I think this is such a great question. What vulnerability is scary? What happens? What if it's used against you? Absolutely. Right. What happens if it is used against you? And it happens all the time.
Right.
I mean, there's an opportunity to really step into a place of advocacy, and to, I talk about this a lot in our Understanding Humans. We have something called the discuss circuit. Then this is Yak's work again. And the discuss circuit is responsible for holding boundaries. We have something called the rage circuit. The rage circuit is responsible for us speaking up, for advocating for ourselves and others, and being an ally. This is an opportunity to be able to hold boundaries, speak your truth, and stand in your power. And sometimes things are used against us, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, it also makes me think, and I can't say that I'm seeing this now, but after the 2001 tech bust, we from that came CEOs who were much more empowered. This humility that comes from coming off the great perch and having to wade through tough times gives us humility and empathy that sometimes we haven't been able to foster during heady times. Yeah. And I suspect that what is going around at the moment could make us all much better leaders than we had been in the past.
And I think it is.
From perspective of empathy and experience. I see here first I want to note the poll. So the poll was my organization regularly monitors employee well-being. Currently 36% said yes. We have a systematic method of addressing employee well-being. And then yes, but only if an employee informs leadership an issue at 36%. Mm-hmm. And then almost 30% no, we don't track employee levels of well-being. So I would say this is up significantly from, before the pandemic. And it's a good sign. We got to work on those other 30% that aren't currently monitoring.
I love it.
A question, or this is just a comment from my friend Paul. The epidemic of anxiety seems directly linked to mass drought of empathy, a vicious cycle. And a question from Brian: how can we ensure that we look out for each other and for our customers, partners, even our competitors, when so much of corporate culture and focus is on competition internally and externally?
Yep. I think there's an opportunity for leaders who are asking these questions to really understand and master resonance, and learning to speak from the right hemisphere in a very different way, learning to become fluent in resonant language, and balancing that out. You can still have competition, you can still have the ways in which you're showing up, and you can balance it with resonant language. I think, a great example of that was Oscar Munoz, the former CEO of United. I think 5 years ago it was, when that passenger got bullied and kind of punched and pulled off the plane, something like that. So Oscar, issued an apology, and the apology was very transactional. Hey, we did the best we could. We tried to reaccommodate, whatever that apology was. Well, because it was so transactional and from the left hemisphere, there was a huge public uproar. And in fact, his PR firm came back 5 days later with a new apology. And that new apology had emotion, 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 and then the word sentiments in it. Now, whether that landed better for the public, I don't know. However, had he begun this whole process with a left hemisphere apology and combined it with the right hemisphere, he would have encompassed the whole thing. He would have included the resonant language piece, and that probably would have made a huge difference.
Raj, give us a quick tutorial when you talk about left and right hemisphere. What are the differences?
Yeah, it's actually really simple. You can think of the left hemisphere as being transactional and the right hemisphere as being relational. You can think of the left hemisphere as evaluating, comparing, and measuring, and the right hemisphere as having the vocabulary and that understanding of needs, feelings, and our bodies. Think of a time when you were in a meeting, and the meeting went on for an hour or two, and the meeting ends and you're like, oh, I'm starving, or oh, I have to go to the bathroom, right? In that moment, you've had to go to the bathroom for a while or have been hungry for a while, but it is literally a movement from left to right where you had the awareness of, I'm starving, I have to use the bathroom. And it's becoming more fluid. And again, that self-awareness piece of vacillating intentionally between the hemispheres.
Thank you. The epidemic, let's see. Oh, we have one more poll. I feel supported by my organization to speak up when I'm feeling overwhelmed. So please complete that and we'll let people know how it sits. Next question. It seems that we need to change our way of thinking about overwhelm, anxiety, loneliness. These are not necessarily signs of mental illness. They are part of being human. Not dealing with can lead to pathology, greater problems, and brokenness.
Who said that? That's brilliant.
Yeah, Eastwood Christian.
That sums up the whole presentation. Come to the stage.
And
Exactly.
I was at a conference of CEOs last week, and the concept of neurodiversity came out,
Right.
which was, very much in line with what Eastwood just said, which is there's just diversity of neurological infrastructure, and that what we should perhaps be doing is looking for the superpower that comes with ADHD and ADD and some other neurological, I don't want to call them symptoms, issues. Give us your perspective on this, Raj. How do we acknowledge, embrace neurodiversity?
No, it's such an important question. And, I'm still in the throes of diving into this very, very deep topic. I think that it is very important to understand, depending upon your role, the nuances of each of the different neurodiverse ways of being. But the really important thing here is resonant language. Let me just dive a little deeper in without being repetitive. When we try to solve for something immediately out of the gate, where the person is just sharing their experience and you're like, oh, there's a book you can read, or, oh, I have a solution for that. Here's how you can fix this. The research is starting to show that that's actually harmful to the brain. When we have the experience of exclusion, whatever capacity, whether it's being interrupted or ignored or humiliated, the pain centers in our brain light up. And the brain codes exclusion as physical injury. So it's like being kicked in the shin or punched in the gut. When we have this experience of not heard or not listened to, this becomes gaslighting. So gaslighting is defined as minimizing, discounting, or dismissing someone's experience. The opposite of gaslighting is validating. You don't actually have to agree with the person, but you can validate their experience. Something as simple as someone saying, oh my God, it's so cold in here. And then the other person going, no, it's not. That's gaslighting.
Mm.
Resonant language is all about validation. And validation is what allows a person's reality to come forward for them in the moment, whether it's true for you or not. It doesn't matter. It's true for them. And when we are able to have that mastery in validation and resonant language, that's where the bridge happens. That's where the connection happens. That's where the secretion of all of the feel-good neurochemistry happens. And so if we can do that, even working with autistic children, for example, not being able to understand their distress, but being able to coo at them at the moment, life-changing.
All right.
Because in that moment, they feel connected from a resonant state. And that's what I'm advocating for, no matter the mental health issue or divergent state.
So, Raj, talk a little bit about your boot camps.
So the Biology of Belonging Bootcamp is 12 weeks. It's 1 hour a week. It's free to the public. It's run whenever I have time to run them. Or you can hire me to bring them internally. And I run them, quite a few of them for companies who want to do trauma-informed care, offer trauma-informed courses. We focus on IRG leaders, ERG leaders. We focus on reestablishing trust for teams that have been through some difficult things. We do this post layoffs for companies that want to kind of recreate that binding, that cohesion. It's really a deep dive into the epigenetics of who we are as humans and looking at the nervous system and the trauma and how that influences and impacts us on a day-to-day basis. Epigenetics is simply the stressors that we experience in our day-to-day lives, as well as the research now shows that we carry the transgenerational stressors of our ancestors, parents, grandparents, etc., depending upon which source is cited, 500 years. So, we really kind of dive deep into unpacking all of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone, we will post this. We will make this available by Monday at Culture Radio On Demand. And we'll do some social media so you get a link there. Rajkumari, thank you very much. I hope you get to go outside and play.
Yes, thank you, Eugene. Thank you everyone for coming. Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye all.